Alright folks, I'm back. Fixing to give these heads another good scrubbing with some soap and water to make sure there's no oil where it don't need to be. It's something you want to do before assembly. Biggest part of that, you want to make sure that you put some oil in the areas that you don't want it to rust right away. Before that even, you want to blow it off and make sure all the water is off of it, because these things will flash rust in a hurry. It's always a good idea. This is a low buck rebuild. You obviously want to replace all your valve stem seals. These are the ones that I would suggest. They cost a little bit more, but they do a lot better job. Now, this is my brother's engine. He was the one that was working on the heads before. We gave him a good scrub down, but nothing major. Now, he lapped all these valves in. Now, once you do that, you want to make sure that the valve matches the valve seat that you lapped it into, because that's the one that's going to give you the best sealing, the best compression. Now, I'm doing it old school. I don't have one of those fancy big old C-clamp valve spring compressors. I got this old thing right here. Basically, you clamp it onto the spring, screw it down, it compresses the spring. You put your keepers in and slowly release. I've found I like using this better. It's easier to control it than having that big old C-clamp style, which can be awkward. I'll show you what I mean by the valve seats here in a second. Bring it right back. Okay, so if you look down in here, you can almost not see it. The lighting is terrible, I know. But you see how you got a shiny edge. Let's see if I can get real close here. This little shiny right here is where we lapped it in. That's your sealing surface. Each one of these, in order to have good compression, you want to lap them in. Like I said, this is a budget rebuild. I ain't taking nothing to a machine shop because I can't afford that kind of thing. However, if they're pretty bad, pretty worn out, you want to take it to a machine shop, have the valves redone, have the valve seats redone. Now, we checked all these valves. None of them are bent or messed up that way. The wear on them is acceptable, but like I said, low buck rebuild. So I'll bring you back when I got more. All right, we're back. That was pretty quick, but something I forgot to mention. Anytime you're doing a rebuild on an engine, before you final wash it, now here's the thing about this, and the reason I say this is before you final wash it, where it's clean and you're putting it together. All of these holes, these are for your spark plugs, your exhaust bolts. Up on the top here, you can see, let's see if I can get you in here, where you can see one. Yeah, right there. That little hole right there, that's for the valve cover bolts. Alright, each one of these bolt holes that has threads in it, you want to run a tap down through, or if you got a thread chaser kit, it's even better. You want to chase all of the threads to make sure there's no leftover sealer in them or carbon or anything else that's going to give you a false torque reading when you go to torque everything down. And also, it's another part of the cleaning process. You want to make sure it's clean. All right, more later. Something else you want to consider when you're chasing these threads. The last thing you want to do is bust a tap off inside of them, because taps are hardened and they do not want to come out. So I would suggest use a little bit of oil. I find that this stuff works really good because it's just light enough, but not too light, that it does the job. And if you're going to be reusing your hardware, you also want to chase the threads on those too. The bolts, anything like that. Now, depending on what year, and now this is only for Chevy, I don't know about the other makes and models, but depending on what year you're running, you have one-use only bolts that are basically designed to have the threads to stretch to a certain point, and then they are no longer usable because they will not torque correctly. I'm going to be using some old bolts. Basically, they're from the 80s, so I don't have that concern. I don't know exactly what year it was that they started using. They're called torque to yield bolts. I think they started that with the next generation engines, but this is still the old generation, so I don't have as big a worry about that. But just something else to consider. I figured I'd show you one of these as far as tapping them out. These are the exhaust manifold bolts. Sorry about the ghost door. So pull one of these out of here. Now if you look here, a little bit of oil, but you can see down in between the threads, and you might be able to see, I can see it. There's a little bit of rust and corrosion. Okay. Alright, so down in between here, you can see there's a little bit of rust. You want to get all that out of there so these things turn freely into the holes that you're going to be doing. Now, not all of these threads are used, but I like to go all the way up. If there's threads there, I like chasing them. So, like I was saying earlier, a little bit of oil. That's probably more than enough. Take your die. Of course, these are 3/8 by 16. So, now if you look at the die here, I don't know if you can see how the cutting thread in there is, it's hard to see, but one side of this is tapered in, so it's easier to start whatever it is excuse me, that you're going to be cleaning out of the threads of. The other side of it is more flat. You always want to use this side to start because it's just easier. So, just like with any bolts, you always start it by hand first. You don't want to cross thread. We're not trying to cut new threads, we're just trying to clean out the existing threads. Now what I like to do, I'll take my handy dandy ratchet here, make sure it's on tighten, and I'll just run it in through. This is why we use the oil, it just makes this process a lot easier. Just run it in until you got no more threads left. Almost there. Okay, we're at the end of the threads. Loosen it. And basically just back it back out. In a lot of cases, depending on how much junk you got out of the threads, you can hand thread it back out. This one, not so much. But there we go. Run it back out. Okay. So now you got clean threads that aren't going to give you any grief. So now just one bolt, you can't really see it too good, but if you look down in these little pockets, these are specifically designed to catch whatever crap that comes out of the threads. I don't know if you can see this right here. This is the junk that came out of those threads. So in between each one, you want to take your air, if you've got air, hopefully, and just blow all that crap out of there. So down here, on the hole itself, you got to use an actual tap. Again, it's 3/8 16. Now, same thing, you got the little catch pockets in between. So you lube each set of threads. Stuff comes out really quick. Okay, lube your threads. And again, I can't stress this enough. You start this by hand because you do not want to screw the threads up. You're just cleaning them out. So get it to where you can turn it in by hand. Let me get this one out of the way just in case. And you take your tool. Somebody's not paying attention over here. Get that cameraman. Woman. So thread it in. Now this one here is pretty clean, so I can just turn it with one finger. So it's not too bad. You just go down until you feel it dead stop, and then back it out. Now you don't want to back it all the way out with the tool on it because you could drop it on the floor, and like I said, these taps are hardened. They will break. Now on this one, like I said, there wasn't a whole bunch of junk in the threads, so it wasn't too bad. So start the other one. Yep, got to a point where it's a little hard to turn by hand. So then put your tool back on there, crank it down. This one's giving me a little bit more resistance, but not much. Dead stop. Or just a little bit more. Good. Alright, and back it out. Now same thing with the die, with the tap. You want to make sure if there's any junk in these threads, you can see just a little bit in there. Blow that out of there or wipe it down if you don't have air. And then you always want to make sure in these holes that you blow them out, because anything that didn't get collected on the tap is down in that hole, and you want to blow that out of there. And it's that simple. It's the same process for all of the bolt holes and all of the bolts that you're going to be reusing. Okay, got some bad news. Here was all rip roaring ready to put these heads together for this engine, and then I find that right there. That unfortunately is a crack, which means this head is junk. I don't know if I mentioned it in any of my videos, but I have mentioned, or other people have mentioned it, that these factory Vortec heads are notorious for cracking. So if you happen to get a set, get one of these engines at the junkyard, I would suggest clean them up real good and check them over, fine-tooth comb, look at them real good, just to be sure they're not cracked, because it's hard to come up with a set of these that aren't. So, see ya.